Hi and welcome everybody. This is the Hobo Prepper, and today I am interviewing Mr. John DeCarmine. Say hi, Mr. DeCarmine.
Hello, everybody. So I'm the executive director of Grace. Grace is a one-stop homeless assistance center, low-barrier emergency shelter. We provide 129 beds of emergency shelter, meals through Cafe 131. Got a really great street outreach program that takes the best of our services to people who can't or won't come into shelter, and then we operate permanent housing programs throughout Gainesville too. Yeah, low barrier shelters. So it's acknowledged to be the best way to provide services, and thinking about the way other shelters have been provided or other shelter has been provided in years past, there was a lot of programs that tried to make people fit the needs of the program in order to allow them to receive services. And what low barrier shelters do pretty simply is we make sure that our programs fit the needs of the people that we're actually trying to serve, rather than trying to force people into certain roles or boxes that may not be natural for them. So to put it in not too many words, we try to make it as easy as possible for people to access our services, and try to make sure that there are no barriers that would prevent somebody from coming in and getting help. We went fully low barrier in 2016. We were never particularly high barrier. High barrier is going to be a place that says something like, hey, in order for you to come in, we're going to require sobriety or identification, which is really easy for people to lose, or that you have income or that you have a job and things like that. And we often talk about it in terms of, imagine if you called the doctor and the doctor said, hey, as soon as you're not sick anymore, come on into my doctor's office and we'll take care of your problems. That's what I see a lot of high barrier shelters doing. If you have been sober for 30 days and you have a job and you have connections in the community and you don't have any other issues, well, then you really don't need our help. So if you can already do all of those things, that's not when you should be coming into a homeless shelter. It's when you haven't been able to sort that stuff out. So as far as how we do that for, how do you craft a giant program that meets the individual needs of people who all have different needs, it's a little bit difficult. Low barrier is not the same as saying there are no rules here. Low barrier simply means we don't want to prevent you, if we don't have to, from receiving any services here. So what low barrier looks like on a daily basis is we just have some basic expectations around health and safety. But we're not trying to do any kind of healing or fixing or behavioral control or anything like that. So the answer is you can have done anything leading up to when you arrive at Grace, but your ability to continue to receive services here will basically be determined on your behavior and how you show up in this collective and communal setting. So what that might look like, this morning everybody here is in crisis. First of all, to understand that is critically important. So if we're serving 200 people a day, I have been at shelters where if you call the director a bad name because you're frustrated, you get banned. I have been in shelters where if you have alcohol on your breath, you get banned for 6 months. Or if you forget to say please or thank you, or if you slam a door because you're in the middle of the worst crisis of your life and you're having a particularly bad day, we don't believe that is a reason to tell somebody you don't deserve help. I think it's very natural that somebody's in the midst of a really bad crisis and they're going to get frustrated. They may take that out on the copy machine. They may take that out on the executive director. They may take it out on a door. At some point, there's a line between, hey, you're frustrated and I get that, and what you're doing is creating an environment that's unsafe for other people to be in. But we're going to work with people, and even when people first kind of push up against that line, there's an opportunity for us to de-escalate that person, to help them kind of come back into what's expected here, as opposed to immediately finding an example or a reason for them not to be allowed to receive help.
And how is Grace Marketplace implementing the housing first? Because I see people going in and out just through my travels through here, but it seems like mostly the people that that get a check are the ones that are getting the housing. Whereas my understanding of housing first is it doesn't matter whether you get a check or not. You should have a roof over your head so that you can start getting that check and getting your stability.
Sure.
So like how is Grace Marketplace accomplishing this goal with their Housing First program?
Yeah, so people are going to have access to different kinds of programs depending on their need. And, people love to think about homelessness as if there's one solution for everybody. And in some ways there is. I mean, housing is the only thing that's going to actually solve somebody's homelessness. But if you look, within the homeless population, the group of folks that you're talking to may have some needs that are as serious as kind of like if you came into the emergency room having a heart attack. Some people have some needs that are a little bit more in line with like showing up to the emergency room having broken your arm, totally different sets of responses that you would need. In our shelter, it's implemented in a couple different ways. One, we're entirely housing focused. So, again, other shelters, you may have a case manager who spends 20% of their time talking to a person about employment and 20% talking about their health and 20% of their time talking about, issues with other people and 20% of this and only 20% of the time are they talking about housing. We bring in a lot of different service providers who can handle a lot of those things. So instead of us talking to people about employment, Career Source would come in and talk to people about employment. Instead of us trying to talk to somebody about physical health care or mental health care, we've got the Mobile Outreach Clinic here. We've got the Grace Healthcare Services Corporation here. We've got Meridian here to do some basic stuff around mental health or physical health care, because we're not going to be good at that. We'll never be as good at that as a doctor who comes here to do that. So one way that this is implemented is that we're very focused on housing with an understanding that it's the only solution to homelessness. All of our programs, particularly our rapid rehousing programs and our permanent supportive housing programs, you can get into them if you're qualified and the next person to be eligible for it, regardless of if you have income, regardless of anything other than you've just got to be willing to work with us to stay in that housing. But then, Housing First runs up against the reality of we can have the coolest program philosophies in the world, but unless we're the ones paying the rent for a unit, people are going to have some kind of income. So there are still always going to be people who we are working with, whether that's to get a Social Security check, a disability check, or basic, more traditional paid employment income. Because the reality is, if we're not the ones paying the rent for a unit, somebody's got to pay the rent for a unit. And our goal then becomes, how can we help you find an affordable unit? Maybe can we connect you with a roommate that would cut your costs in half, whatever else. But that's another route that we would take with people in the shelter.
Something that I see, everybody always seems to, you need four walls around you, but housing isn't necessarily four walls. I mean, in my tent, before it came up missing, in my tent, that was my sanctuary. That was my four walls. That was my housing. That was what kept me dry.
Sure.
Why, even though you don't have the shelter capacity for the population, even though you're trying to get people into housing as best as you possibly can, why is there not a secondary focus on this is also considered housing, so that people can at least have some form of stability, even if they're not getting a check or getting disability, so that they can get to that point for disability or to get a traditional check?